What is it that makes a man? Is it the strength of his arm or the quickness of his wit? Is it his ability to persevere under duress? Is it his ability to span the breadth of emotion and not lose control? The poem titled If by Rudyard Kipling begins with this line: "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too." The question of what is it that makes a man is a question that almost every man must answer in his lifetime, and it is a question that every man who hears these words will, for all that I am understanding, find familiarity into him. It's a difficult question, and it's in line with some of the things that we talk about here on the Redacted Culture Cast, but it comes at a time where we are looking at uncertainty on all bounds. It certainly isn't the most dire straits for the West, but there have been no shortage of people sounding the alarm bells that things are not as they should be. And even more personally, we have our own individual lives where, in some sense, we have to ask ourselves this question sometime in our life, and even if the answer doesn't come quickly, we will find ourselves remiss or missing something if we never seek to its conclusion. And it isn't a question completely unfamiliar in philosophy. There's an entire subfield called ethics, which has been divided, conquered, addressed, concerned, dressed down, overinflated, or manipulated for many, many people's nefarious intent. But even if there are others who are playing games with the way that we read and think about ethics, it does not give us license to neglect the question ourselves. Many of our historical stories, or even the fairy tales and literature of the past, seek to answer this question, even if it is, in a sense, in the abstract. And you can go as dark as Dostoevsky, or as broad as, who else would be a good author in that case? Jack London, or as meticulous as Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. But we can even reach further. And that is I do not intend to answer the entire question today. I don't think I have the right writ or wit to accomplish it in one go, but there is one subject that I want to speak to, and that is self-control. So before we get any further into this episode, I want to thank the sponsor of this show, which is Obsidian Arms. And Obsidian Arms is a company out of Minnesota that is not only a manufacturing capable facility, but they also produce a series of punches and toolkits that are firearm specific, especially if you're into the AR-15, or also more general use if you're pursuing a future in gunsmithing professionally or otherwise. And those toolkits, whether they are punches or are other parts needed, they come with a lifetime warranty. And so if you intend to do the blue-collar job of providing fine equipment, then give them a shot. Give them a look. And if you are working on a design that is something that they can also accomplish for you, so if you are designing a product, whether it's out of metal or otherwise, and you want to engage in somebody else's professional experience, their now decades of professional experience in that field, then give them a call or reach out to them at www.obsidianarms.com, because they can take many of your ideas and work with you to bring them to life. In fact, you might be surprised the number of tools that you have on your gun or on your kit that they've actually been the secret manufacturer. So give them a check. They're a honest group of men who men and women who I have enjoyed to get to know over the years, even if it is not as close as I would have wanted to. But yeah, do that. So back to the question: what is it that makes a man? And if we were to go past certain things like aesthetics or whatever it is that makes people, like, kind of fits into the germane aspect of your culture. And I mean, if we were to dig past the aesthetics of it, where in this culture, men are, a person who is a man does this, or if a man does that, or looks this way, or makes this much money, or does this in business, or does this in war. If we were to kind of separate those things away, and Jack Donovan does this in a very different way than I'm going to address this time, although I don't think that we would be completely in odds. He does it in his book called The Way of Men, which is a book that I highly recommend reading. But the one subject I want to talk about is self-control. And there was an opportunity, and let's not call it an opportunity, more like a twist of fate, so to speak, where I got to serve under a man who will go unnamed because I haven't asked him if I could release his name at this time. But I was a young private on a deployment that was not the easiest deployment that we had. There was not only the pressure of a higher combative year in deployment that time, but also pressures coming from above. Our platoon, felt sandwiched between the pressures of doing the job and the pressures of, let's call it, military politics. And so you add to those two things the mixture of how people interact with one another, and the tension did certainly create plenty of opportunities for things to go very badly very quickly. But I remember there was this one mission we were on where things did not go as planned. And that's probably the simplest way to say it. We didn't have any casualties that deployment, or that mission. Sorry, we did on that deployment, but not on that mission. And but even from the get-go, there was not necessarily stumbling block, but problem after problem after problem. The target building wasn't exactly as the intel presented it. It was actually quite different, much more expansive. The movement between locations was much more difficult and made burdensome by both vegetation of the year and the way that the ground had been irrigated and tilled. There was and there was no easy way to move from our chosen destinations in order. There was no easy way to do it without setting ourselves up perfectly for an ambush. And so we had to choose to take the harder road, the harder path to get to where we were trying to go. And along the way, we encountered an ambush that they didn't see us. We saw them and were able to counter it in a certain way that was not exactly spectacular. But what it did is it put a wrench in the gears where we couldn't as quickly or as effectively reach the objectives that we were seeking to accomplish that day. And as that went on, it compounded and it compounded and compounded, and you had funny stories. I unfortunately tore my pants in an unflattering way, and there were problems that we faced on this mission that could have gone very terribly. But by dint of good fortune, we were able to kind of stop by the end of roughly 36-ish hours into the process, and we decided that we were going to essentially stop the mission and then readdress the situation at another time. And the pressure coming from above was to continue on, but the leader who was in charge, who was dealing with all of these, in the grand scheme of them, smaller-ish problems, but he was wise enough to see them compounding to become a recipe for absolute disaster, and he made sort of an executive decision to essentially end the mission, to close it down, I believe, and return to base. And he did that in opposition to higher orders. But all along that time, after every single interruption and problem and challenge, and every time that we had to halt a movement and it interrupted our flow and it challenged our ability to see the objective as achievable, he maintained an air of stability. On every mission that man went on, the team was stable, the squad was stable, the platoon was stable, the group that was on the field was stable, because they could look to him as the leader and see that if he was keeping his cool, so can I. And on the inverse, that was a story that, like, it was. I think that it settled in with me later, but the gravity of errors that could have compounded into a mass casualty situation were mitigated because this man maintained an air not of control, but of stability. He continued to work and march on and solve the problems until he came to the conclusion that we were too exhausted, too worn out, too dehydrated, and our munitions had been depleted enough that it was no longer worth attempting to do a resupply at that time without threatening the potentiality of a mass casualty situation. And the mission had gone on for long enough that the opposing forces were beginning to observe how we would react to these delays and set up ambushes. And so there was combat on that mission, and we fought that fight, and then essentially he made an executive call above his rank, so to speak, that brought the team back, and we refit and readdress the situation at another time, which is a great. It's fortunate that we were able to do that. But the lesson learned, and the thing that needs to be maintained about that, is how this man who was in a leadership position, one of the things that made that could be measured about him was that even under the duress of the deployment and the pressures coming from the field and above, he was always stable. Not perfectly emotionally calm, not perfectly verbally calm, but at the same time, the men could trust him as the leader to make cool-headed decisions. Now, there are plenty. In fact, I think that is the exception to what is oftentimes observed, or at least depicted in film, and we can skip around with that a little bit. But it raises the question of this aspect. What was it about him that led so well? And that it was his sense of self-control, or that the measure that he lived up to was that under pressure that was not only a threat to his own life but to his men, he didn't lose a sense of stability. He didn't lose control. He didn't revert to shouting and screaming and micromanaging his teams. He allowed them to work as they were trained to do, and he trusted his team leaders and his squad leaders, and even to extent his privates, to do what they had learned to do so well. And if he had been anybody else, if he had lost his sense of composure under pressure at that time, it would have served as catastrophe for all of us, or at least very likely, given the circumstances of that day. And so that is the plug of the story. Now let's break it down into a principle. One way that a man can be measured is how well he keeps his composure under different types of stress, different types of conflict. And this is not to be mistaken with hiding it, putting it away, and letting it explode later. There's a problem, a challenge, not necessarily a dilemma, but there's almost like a dichotomy, that goes on in the military and in some special operations units and in some realms of gun culture and in some of the private contracting world, where men are expected to be hard, and that sounds weird, but you get my point. They're expected to be strong and stoic and stable and consistent, and it goes on so long until they explode, until they finally fray at the edges. And you can see this idea represented in a couple different ways. There's this mentality of work hard, party hard. And while that has its merits, it shouldn't be allowed to be considered, and that's not allowed, it should be a warning sign between brothers and friends that the partying is the off gas of the stress of the situation more than it should be. It becomes the habit, it becomes the addiction, it becomes the problem. But it also serves as a warning to those who do serve in the line of duty, in that especially when you're in positions of leadership, your ability to maintain composure instills confidence in your men that they trust you and they are capable of performing what you have led them to do. And so we can imagine references to film where, the bad guy, usually the second in command, usually it's not the big villain of the story, but the second in command, right before the big conflict, the big climactic fight happens, you see usually a secondary commander humiliated in defeat by the championing forces of the good guys, and his dictatorial evilness is caricatured and inverted into a sniveling, screaming man losing his cool in front or in control, losing his cool and thus control of his men. But I don't want to just live in these abstracts. I don't want to just live in the mentality of, the measure of a man is his ability to keep composure, so just like be stoic and only stoic all the time. What I want to do is I want to be able to explore this concept and this principle with you in a way that not only leaves us, that I can convey some of the lessons that have been thankfully conveyed onto me, but then also that we don't approach critical problems or critical concepts like these with frivolity. It's not as simple as, like till Valhalla, brother, or whatever the current trope is. It's something that we hold much more dear, and I don't think it's something to be trivialized, whether by the feminists or the politicians or the pundits or the weak and the sniveling and there's a word I heard again recently, the craven. It should not be defined by the craven, which will always lead to a criticism of somebody's character. But the argument goes, and the idea is something like this. We admire men who can withstand the pressures of their life as well as even greater circumstances. We admire that as a character quality in them. Why? Well, on the one hand, it might illustrate, it might also illuminate capacity, that person has a greater capacity for handling chaos than somebody else. You could almost think in a caricatured paladin joke, or a sense of discipline in that sense. But I think there's a little bit more to it. I think there are the two general sides to the coin. The two pieces of this composure fit together with dedication to the objective, to the ideal, which is do not lose sight of what your aim is because your emotions are trying to convince you otherwise. And essentially do not give in to fear. And the ability to maintain control over your actions is the way that you can, in a sense, measure your capacity. So the ideal is to be able to pay attention to and focus on what is right and true and good, what you ought to do, how you can accomplish it, what is effective, how to keep going under pressure. And the measurement of it is at what time, what point do you break? What does it take to break your composure? Now, petty criminals have even figured this out in the way that they approach a target or something that they might test what do you call it? Test or probe or case a location. If you have if you're holding, or there's another story, but it might have to wait. If you're in a position of maintaining security in an area, do not be surprised when individuals who that are up to no good, but it's not but the escalation of force hasn't reached the appropriateness for that force. Do not be surprised when they are trying to bait you into a reaction. This is a common tactic amongst the left, amongst the people that refer to themselves or are referred to as Antifa. This is a very common protest strategy, and it is to incite a reaction. We've had James Lindsay on the show. He's talked about it. This kind of conversation is a way to, in a sense, improve your intellect when it comes to the use of force. A person who is easily baited is easily defeated, because not only do you become predictable, but that predictability is the weakness itself. If you can be made unstable, you lose sight of what is going on and what is the goal and what are your objectives and what are the real threats, and you become fixated quickly, almost tunnel vision immediately, on whatever it is that's trying to incite a reaction. So, one level of composure, if you're to say that you have greater composure than a 21-year-old illiterate kid wearing a full black bloc trying to create an incident, then the response would be you should be able to maintain your cool in such a way that you are not baited into becoming the next internet famous bad guy, whatever you want to call it. There's a way that this goes on there's a way that this can be measured in other ways, though. This can be looked at in different arenas. You might think of it in conversations between lawyers, or the sort of responses that people have in their testing of one another's integrity or character. Men oftentimes in honor cultures will do this to one another. They will probe to see where you break, or if you hold yourself together under a little bit of pressure. And it's easy, in fact, it's oftentimes intended, but easy to forget where you're at or lose sense of where you're at, and instead be consumed in the ego game of vying for status, which ultimately the trap is to make you do something that would cause you to lose status. And so if you are going to play the honor culture game, beware of the trap. But I think it's a little bit more. I think we can go another layer deeper here. I think we can expand into the subject to look at our lives in general. There is no shortage of literature written about the crisis of masculinity in the West these days, whether it's the rise of feminism or forms of egalitarianism that are anything but, whether it's the expanse of programs for everybody but men, if it's the constant shaming or the condemning or the double-sidedness where women want to be treated equal until it's no longer advantageous to them, or whatever the way that that's presented in various elements of contemporary culture and society and norms. But there is no shortage of men who... There's no shortage of conversation about men or the crisis of masculinity. Not only do we not have these ideas of rites of passage anymore, but perhaps we never really did to begin with, never to the fullest extent that they were explained on. And as soon as somebody establishes a rite of passage, it is immediately mocked and thrown out. But the important element here, and the way that I think it has applied to the military, is that many times young men see the military as that rite of passage that will finally tell them that they are a man. And many men will place their identity in that position, their achievements in that arena. But what happens to them when all of that goes away? And we're not talking about let's just say the commonish level of separation from the military, but people who have had 20 years of illustrious activity and now their identity is missing because they are no longer there. I don't want to speak down about it. I don't want to speak negatively about it. I don't want to speak away from it, but I want to speak to the challenge that happens when a person has invested so much of their time in being a certain thing, a SEAL, a Ranger, a Delta Force, CAG dude, whatever, and now doesn't have that to put their identity in. Honestly, I think it's quite deeper than the old claims of, well, I don't have a brotherhood anymore, because although you can't, it's not as easy, or it's not the same thing to make friends of the same, not caliber, but conviction might be it, but let's just call it aesthetic, sort of, not nature. It's not like a ontologically differentiating category, but it may be difficult. It's not impossible, and it would be inappropriate for somebody to expect others who didn't do the military to be just like them. It would just be rude. But this collapsing, this crashing down, if a person can withstand the pressure of a firefight, but the thought of balancing a checkbook drives their nerves into extinction, that is a subject worth considering. If you can lead men to war, but you cannot lead your wife, that is a chink in that armor. It is in fact maybe a greater condemnation of the lack of capacity that a person has, and that's exactly the point that needs to be looked at. If a man can do certain things, he can exist in a wartime environment, but he loses his cool in the mall, we don't look at that as admirable. And even if we are going to address some grace in the sense of the experiences that the person has gone through, it nevertheless doesn't mean that we excuse the lack of composure, and that we would want to encourage that in one another. And so as you go forth, how does one build their ability to withstand circumstances by testing their composure? Well, it isn't as complicated as it sounds, but it takes small amounts of bravery, small amounts of courage. When you are in a fight, in a verbal conversation with somebody, practice not losing control. If you are in the stress of a job, the workplace, take up enough that you can maintain a sense of composure but feel it stretched just a little. In this sense, it is very much so a skill like working out, and it can atrophy to some extent. And as men get older, they need to find different things that pressure them in this way. For some, it might be going to the gym. For some, it might be public speaking. For some, it might be reading a difficult book. But one measure of a man is his ability to maintain composure even under stress. And so if this has been helpful, or if you want to pitch in on what other things that you think lead to the measure of a man, then there's the comments below if you're listening on YouTube. If you are listening on Spotify, we thank you for your time, and if you leave us a review, I'd be very thankful for it. But ultimately, this show will only grow if you are willing to share with other people. And for those of you who've reached out, thank you. And so, if you want to support us, you can head over to redactedllc.com, or you can follow us at redactedlocals.culture or redactedculture.locals.com. We'll pin it below. That being the case, go forth and conquer.